Oh, man.
Half out of one of the categoricals.
Here.
Welcome, everybody, and happy Friday. I will make sure everybody is in and admitted properly, and then we'll get started here. Okay, looks good. Hey, welcome to our Grundmeyer Leader Services Friday Focus today. Very excited about the topic at hand that has actually come forward with some of the questions that folks have asked, and we decided to kind of formalize that and put that together in our Friday Focus here for the spring. Last year, we did these Friday Focus almost monthly and decided this year that we would do these more quarterly. And so this is our first one for the spring. I'd remind you the purpose of these Fridays Focus is to obviously address a key topic in the field, a very practical hands-on approach to maybe questions and information that the field has requested or has asked questions about. And I think we can deliver on that today. And certainly some networking opportunities to share ideas and strategies and resources on the topic today as well. So our topic today is on trends in the market specific to district leadership and superintendents, as well as some strategies to negotiate your own contracts or even advocate for other administrators in the district, which really puts sometimes superintendents in a precarious spot to evaluate their own performance, but also advocate for their own contracts so that districts don't have to hire people like us to come in and replace you. So with that being said, we're going to start our Fridays focused here with a few trends in the market. And then I'm excited to turn it over to a few guests that I've invited in to share some specific insights and examples and strategies today with you, from small school to large school, from metro school to more rural setting. Darwin Lehman from North Central Iowa, shared superintendent. Shannon Bisgard, retired superintendent from Linmar. And you're going to hear a video from Darren Derflinger, who's currently the superintendent at Van Meter. So excited about introducing them to you here today as part of our Friday Focus. As a reminder here, as we get started, we also record. So I've had a lot of people ask about the recording. We will put together some notes from today, and we will be sharing those on our YouTube channel, as well as kind of a flyer, one-page flyer about some of the big topics we talked about today. So that will be a follow-up after our Friday Focus today. Let me get started with a few trends in the market that I think will be insightful for you to see. When I thought about this, there's just four that I'm going to put on your radar, and some of these maybe are more evident to you than others. The first is superintendent salaries and administrator salaries in at least Iowa and across the Midwest, where we're doing searches, are going up, and that's because the market is driving them up. And I think districts are trying to retain good quality people. I'm going to show you some statistics in a minute about some of those numbers that backs that trend up. The other thing we are seeing, and I'll put together some data at the end of this year from the Iowa Works site here, but the jobs, superintendent, principal jobs are actually opening up earlier. We normally see a trend of about December and February. Now we are seeing trends of November and January, where jobs are opening up sooner. And part of that is incentives, if you will, for superintendents to announce retirement earlier, even financial incentives. So that is certainly a trend. If you're feeling that, that is obviously true. Next is paid family insurance for principals and superintendents. We are seeing across the board is being offered less and less. And I think that is partly from the insurance perspective or the tiers that they often host. I think other times it's kind of an equity thing. If a district is not offering it to their administrators or teachers, the board may feel like they need to increase salary to compensate for family insurance. But we are seeing that when they're hiring a superintendent, that is coming off as a benefit more and more. Again, the good news there is they tend to compensate with salary, which certainly has retirement benefits. The bad news is family insurance can't always be assumed. It's part of the package anymore. And then the other trend I would mention just in general is for superintendents, especially initial. Little echo there. With an initial offer, a 2-year contract is the standard. I know most new superintendents are probationary unless they've moved up in the ranks, if you will, in the same district. But a 2-year contract tends to be the standard. So just a couple things I'd offer there. Let me back up my assertion there that the salaries are going up for superintendents. This is SAI, School Administrators of Iowa, data from last year to this past year. And you can see there, just running some basic numbers, that we have just over $7,000 salary increase in superintendent salaries. Now, there's lots of rationale for this. One of the biggest things is the retention piece. You know, a board that really values the superintendent, wants to keep them, is going to make a concerted effort and should to retain their superintendent. The other thing is we're seeing a few more shared superintendent jobs with districts sharing superintendents now. That drives that average up a little bit, but that is the average increase between years. Do a lot of searches and get a lot of calls on, advocating for a package, a retention package to keep a superintendent from boards as well as superintendents. And so I just want to mention before we talk about a few strategies today, some of the factors that board members tend to consider that I hear. The first one is the current superintendent's performance. If there's, whether it's fair or not, whether there's a perception that superintendent is serving the district and the board well, that certainly puts the superintendent in a position to advocate maybe more firmly for what they want, and gives that board the autonomy to want to keep them longer. So performance is a big factor, and usually superintendent contract negotiations go hand in hand with your performance or the evaluation. The second thing is market comparisons. I just shared some numbers with you, but what is the market doing? What are the rest of the administrators, as you see there in orange? What's their package? And if often times you're waiting to see what the teachers union settles for to consider what type of raise or increase, if any, the administrators and the superintendent get. So the market factors, as well as the other administrators, are certainly something the board should and does consider. And then the other big thing I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is just what's the financial situation of the district? You know, if you're cutting the budget, it's harder for a superintendent to take a nice salary increase politically, and for the board to support that versus, what type of state aid are we getting and can we leverage, and where did we settle with the teachers union perhaps? So those are the four largest factors that I hear from board members in considering offering a contract package to their superintendent and often their other administrators as well. So before we get on, credit to Allers and Cooney in a recent presentation on this, but big difference today, and you're going to hear our speakers talk about negotiating their contract that tend to be veteran superintendents. Keep in mind, you are in a much better spot when you're obviously not a probationary administrator, whether it's a principal or a director or superintendent. In Iowa in particular, in a lot of other states, there's that probationary period. In Iowa, it's 3 years. If you are new to a district on an administrative contract, you are probationary the first 3 years and it cannot be waived. With that being said, a board still needs just cause to dismiss an administrator and put that in writing, give them due process by May 15th. After that, they would need to consider paying out the rest of that contract if there wasn't just cause. But keep in mind, different conversation if you're probationary versus if you've satisfied that 3-year probationary term. So keep that in mind as we talk about strategies today during the rest of our presentation. Now, in front of you on the screen are a few, again, credit to SAI on this, but these are areas to negotiate. I mentioned here the trend to a 2-year term or a rolling contract. And by the way, you can't necessarily be on a rolling contract until you've extended that exhausted that probationary period, right? A rolling contract once you've satisfied that 3-year term. Salary is certainly an area you can negotiate. Insurance, I mentioned. I would also encourage all superintendents to have some language on evaluation in the contract if you don't already have it. But some of the other winnable space you're going to see in a moment here is about travel, national conferences, professional dues, leaves, and remote work that we're seeing enter contracts more and more as we negotiate contracts. Credit to this presentation as well, but as I just mentioned, HSA plans, vehicle or mileage reimbursement, tax sheltered annuities or 403B plans that maybe aren't as public as salary might be, are other things that are often winnable space for the board to retain and complement a superintendent doing great work that aren't as public or that they might not get pushback in regard to just salary. So please keep that in mind. The last thing I want to mention is this, and then I'll turn it over to Darwin Lehman here in a minute to talk strategies and some more details here. But I see and I coach administrators to think about 3 strategies in advocating for their contract needs. And these are the 3, and there's probably more, and you'll hear some slight differences to some of this today. But the first is based on teacher negotiations and where the district's at and all those other factors we talked about, to simply take what they're willing to give you. And they come back with you in an offer. And we can do this year because we settled for 2% with the teachers. So we'll do a 2% increase for you. Or you asked for more leave. And so we can do 1% and we're going to give you 2 more personal days and compliment you there. But it kind of the wait and see or see where the district settles with other groups and then consider what they offer you. That's one strategy I see happen. Another is number 2, they're advocating for the board president and or vice president. And that's where a superintendent may get them the data, which would be maybe statewide comparisons, maybe some of the market trends, maybe AEA, Area Education Agency data on insurance trends and what other folks are getting on, say, vacation days and things like that. But you present all that information to your leadership on the board and let them kind of advocate for you as you talk about your evaluation and what your needs are. And then third is really whether it's the board president or vice president or yourself, but it's presenting all that data collectively and really letting the data talk, letting the board wrestle with what they're willing to give you to retain you or complement your work, and let the data kind of speak for you, which makes the conversation maybe a little bit more objective, normally in closed session. So those are just 3 unique strategies that I see superintendents use to advocate for their own contracts. I will leave you with this before I turn it over, and that's winnable space for the board, right? The board is the one that are going to have to go to their public and their community and or other administrators and say, we want to keep our superintendent. They presented this information and this is what we could do for them. Salary is the biggest thing that the board's going to get pushback on. I rarely hear that they get pushback on giving the superintendent more flexibility and staying home during holiday breaks or a couple of vacation days or, a stipend for mileage rather than having to track mileage reimbursement. So consider when you're advocating for yourself, maybe your salary needs to go up, no doubt about it, based on the data. But consider some of the winnable space that the board may not get as much pushback on. And that tends to be a lot of times some of those areas outside of salary itself. So I wanted to offer that as we get started, some of the trends, some of the strategies. And I'm going to pause here, catch my breath, and turn it over to Shared Superintendent Darwin Lehman to extend the conversation here around strategies and experiences that he has experienced firsthand. Darwin? Thanks for being here today and presenting.
Thanks, Trent. All right, so I'm going to first start with, I broke this into a couple different phases, but we'll start with maybe brand new superintendents or you're new to a different area. And Trent hit that, you're a 3-year probationary. Things that I would have you consider as you're prepping for that. He talked about look at comparison data. You can get that from the conference, 10 up, 10 down when you look at comparability data that you can get from ISB, ISFIS along that line. Certified enrollment's a typical way to look at some comparability data, but I'll tell you, if you're also, don't be afraid to look at your beds data. I'll give you an example. Lake Mills is up here on the Minnesota border. Their certified enrollment and what their beds enrollment's a difference of about 200 kids sometimes. And so when you run comparabilities, make sure your comparabilities work for you in those as you do that and go negotiate. Also work with Trent or see what's out there with openings, know what the current salary openings are and what those ranges look like to put yourself in that position. The other piece I would say is if you're brand new, if you're looking at this with the standard 2-year contracts, I would ask you to consider them putting in the contract that they will renew your contract in December of January of each year until they get to a 3-year rolling. And the reason for that is not to wait till May or June or April or March whenever they renew contracts, because you've missed one hiring season then. If they decide that they're not going to renew your contract or feed that out for 2 years, you're down to a 1-year contract. That means 1 year of hiring. So I would think that you have the ability to go in and say, okay, I agree to the 2-year contract, but I would like to know, it's kind of becomes a rolling 2-year then. They can extend your contract. You don't need to negotiate the dollar values or any other pieces of that ahead of time, but they need to inform you in December or January with a date set to extend your contract with details to be worked out at a later time. That protects you as a superintendent that just probably sold a house, went to buy a house and moved your family. I think there needs to be a level of protection there. Again, there's some great resources with ISB, ISFIS, and AASA when you look at those. Here's a piece that I think that needs to be done when you're in a job. Trent gave some examples of communicating with the president and vice president. I'm going to tell you what I would recommend is have you think about creating a negotiations committee, one with your certified staff, maybe one with your non-certified staff if they would like access to the board, but also with your administrators and directors. And I would make it the president and vice president. The reason why it's more is I think it's more to have more than one person at the table where 2 people could hear the conversation. With that, so I'm going to use an example that happened in our region. And it was a long-standing practice of the board would give certain dollar values until the superintendent and SBO, here's what we're comfortable with, you go figure out the salaries in that. I think that set the superintendent and the SBO up for failure. When you sit down with this negotiations committee, so we have the certified, the non-certified members, and then administrators and directors, you bring them in, you can present your data, and then you can say, these are recommendations, or here's what we're thinking. Whatever that conversation leads to, I would have everybody initial that at the end of the conversation. This is what we're going to take forward to the board. Doesn't make that it's going to be what happens, but it does reaffirm that when contracts come forward, that committee has at least agreed to those numbers, and it's been your committee's recommendation to move that forward. May not be what the board finally approves, but it protects you as the superintendent with that along that line. We also in Forest City and Central Springs, most contracts for administrators and directors, they can get that stamp of that. I'm going to tell you, we don't allow that to happen with administrators and directors. We require our board president to come back in, review each individual contract with what the board approved at the last meeting before those are issued. That way, there's a double check that exactly what was approved is in those contracts. And I've seen that create problems. When it comes to your contract, I would tell you, what do you value? You know, what are your values? And make sure that you can do that, because Trent did a great job of talking about putting the board in a great space, and there's other things in salary. I would tell you, you know, salary probably means different things to different people at different times of their life, especially when you start getting closer to retirement. Salary has a greater impact with your last 5-year average when it comes to IPERS, which is a lifetime benefit along that line. And I would tell you, you can transition some things maybe that you have in your contract more to salary. So for example, if you had a cell phone stipend, and you had that and you're getting within the last 5 to 7 years, well, maybe you convince them to say, can we move the cell phone stipend and move that to my salary? It won't cost the district anymore. We'll take that number and whatever FICA and IPERS is, we'll take that out, and then you can increase my salary by that amount. That's something for consideration. Again, it's whatever what are your values, you know? Trent gave a number of examples, a cell phone. Maybe it's a tax sheltered annuity. Multiple ways to build a TSA in there. You can have a set dollar amount. You could have it be a percentage of your base. How about that could grow by years of service or performance goals that are established? Some of those things protect the board, and some of those things can help you get to that point. You can look at mileage, school vehicle, leaves. I think there's probably one of the greatest opportunities that depends on your values to take a look at your leaves. What's your vacation days? How many sick days? How can they be accrued? How are they taken care of when you leave the district? With that, I would tell you when you leave the district, there's multiple ways to handle that. One can be written in your contract if how you handle accrued leaves or any leaves and how that's paid out. If it's in your contract, that comes out of the general fund. If they have things written into their board policies on like an early retirement incentives and those things, then that could be paid out of management. It's a good way to protect the district there. Other things for consideration, pay for classes. Maybe there's a retention incentive or a longevity clause that could be a TSA or a lump sum when you leave. Talk about leaves. One of the things I have at Forest City and Central Springs is snow days. And this was back when I started 17 years ago, was we're all working at 4 in the morning. We're up, we're out checking roads. By the time you get in, and then you're dealing with, well, the coaches want to practice. And what do you do with games? You know, it's probably noon because you wrap things up, but your 8-hour day's done. What we've put in, what I have in my contract is on snow days, I'm not required to be in the office. Or when it comes to Thanksgiving break or Christmas break or a spring break, I'm not required to be in the office and use my vacation leave. So there's some things that you can write in your contract to free that up. It's not that you're not working, but it's just that you don't have to be there in the office. You know, other things is long-term disability, life insurance would be some other options. Trent did a great job at talking about health and dental and how that's moving. Maybe you want to coach or a mentor early in your career or even at different times. Could those be something you could write in? Make sure if you're interested in doing consultative work, speaking engagements, lecturing, writing, or other professional duties, that you can get that written into your contract that it doesn't require to use vacation time with that. You know, we talked about indemnification and hold harmless coverage. Those are the things to do. Relocation expenses if you're brand new. Make sure that, which could be moving or temporary housing with that along that line. Again, he talked about contract lengths. I'm kind of old school, been around a long time. So I would always tell you as a superintendent, it'd be nice to get to a 3-year rolling contract, but I think there's other ways to get that if you can have them extend your contract in December or January. Again, remember, you got to protect yourself with that, but you got to put the board in a good spot. The other thing that I've seen when we do contracts, when we do certified contracts and it goes for board approval, I always try to do non-certified and administrators at the same time. One of the reasons is it doesn't draw attention to your administrators or your contracts separately. When it's separate, let 2 to 3, you know, at the next month's board meeting, now we'll do the superintendent's contract. I think you can draw added scrutiny to your contract. So what we try to do is when we take certified teachers and our non-certified staff forward, I try to make sure that we have our administrators and our director contracts go at the same time. Draws less scrutiny to yours along that line. The other piece the last thing I would say is this: if you're looking at being a shared superintendent, I'm going to tell you in my take and where we are with the state support of public education, it's probably not if you're going to be a shared superintendent. It's just going to be a matter of when you could be a shared superintendent in the state of Iowa. What I've seen out there is anywhere from about $20,000, and then there's one that's well above the norm, and there was a reason for it, but there was $45,000 increase to your salary. I would tell you, don't be afraid to negotiate what that dollar value is, but I would tell you to go back and say, what are other values you want in that? I would also tell you, if you become a shared superintendent, I think you got to sit down and really define what a shared superintendent, 2.5 days or whatever your percentage is with each one, really define what the expectations are for you. And make sure that boards, and as you go through do board elections, that continues to be a dialogue, because sometimes what I've seen in sharing is they like the operational sharing, they like the cost savings, but they still think they have a full-time superintendent. I think it's key that you really define that work. So Trent, those were just some thoughts from a Nebraskan, which isn't worth a lot. So
Well, hey, I hope you can at least cheer for Iowa tonight with a big basketball game on TV, Darwin.
always do. I probably got more Iowa State gear than Nebraska gear right now. Just don't tell my family in Nebraska.
I think some really good insights there. And I got to ask you one question here that I thought was interesting as I've got to know you. Do you still, as a veteran superintendent, just advocate for a 1-year contract?
I have a 3-year rolling, so it just rolls every year.
Got it. Got it. I've heard of a couple superintendents that on purpose just advocate for a 1 year for themselves, almost to keep the board maybe excited and maybe on their toes about retaining the superintendent. And that's obviously a little bit easier to do towards maybe the end of your career. But I remember Mark at Mid Prairie and some others that have done that. So love some of the points you made, especially about evaluating and negotiating for your admin team and directors at the same time. That made sense to me. That I'm glad you reinforced. And then some of the things like mentoring, coaching, leaves, tax sheltered annuities, and coursework or pursuing your doctorate. Again, just reinforce those are some winnable space items, often for a board above and beyond salary. So thank you, Darwin. Appreciate the insights, and please stay on for questions once we get done with presentations. I'm going to pivot to maybe a larger school setting and lots of experience and wisdom, hopefully, from a good friend and GLS consultant now in retirement, Shannon Bisgard. Shannon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Trent. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second, hopefully. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. One of the great things about going third is I can pretty much just say, well, those guys said is accurate, and I don't disagree with anything that Trent or Darwin said. And they went through a lot of specifics, so I'm going to take a little bit different approach to try to avoid being repetitive. I'll talk a little more big picture with everything as well, because really everything that Darwin covered as far as all the specific things to discuss, I think are really important to do and really important to consider. Honestly, the fact that I'm having this conversation kind of makes me chuckle, because I used to always tell my board president, I'm probably the worst superintendent at Iowa at advocating for myself in a contract situation. It just wasn't something I loved to do. It wasn't what drove me. But at the same time, I found a style that worked for me, I felt like, and worked for the district. And that's kind of what I want to focus all of my comments on is, there's 1,000 things you can prioritize and look at and do, but you've got to find what works for you. You have to find what works for your district, because it's all part of that fit from the hiring process all the way through till when you leave. So you've got to find a style that works for you, because every situation is different. So your situational awareness just becomes so important. I'll start off a scenario real quick. When I took over at Limar as superintendent, I was associate superintendent before that, and it was a very tumultuous time as I transitioned into the superintendency. And I had to be aware of that and cognizant of that as I was having contract negotiations with the board to go into the superintendent role. So for me, I wanted to provide stability, and I wanted to provide direction, and I wanted to provide consistency. So to me, a 3-year contract was critical for that work, and to provide commitment. And the board agreed. They wanted to show everybody in the community and staff that that was a priority for them as well. And so that was an easy starting point for us to have. After that, my initial contract, I'll talk about here a little bit later on, but that's the perfect time to leverage a few basic things that you really want. You'll never have more leverage than you do at that point. So for me, that was an opportunity to negotiate a little more than I probably typically did. I think that's a great place to start, knowing where the district's at. Trent and Darwin both talked about, the financial situation of your district is critical. If you come in asking for a ridiculous amount, you're just causing ripples throughout your system that not everybody's going to be aware of, but it does ripple through the district, and that becomes problematic. So you have to know your scenario. And if you're an insider, that's easier to do. If you're coming from a different district, that's where your homework comes into play, because you don't want to get in a situation where you're getting off on the wrong foot right away by any means as well. So I think the key right away is know what you want. Because I go into priorities, Darwin called them his values. I thought the same thing for those. I think you have to know that, because there's a million things you can negotiate, but really, where do you want to prioritize your efforts as a superintendent, and where do you want to prioritize in your contract? Is it money issues? We've talked about quite a bit. There's plenty of opportunities there, but also those items that don't come with expense to the district. If you're in a budget cut mode, or funds are tight, like they always seem to be, there's plenty of other ways you can negotiate. I just listed a couple there as well. And Darwin covered a much more extensive list. But the other piece I think is important to do is becoming a more comfortable topic for some people to talk about is mental health. And mental health of a superintendent is just as important as the mental health of your principals and your teachers, your staff members. So as you advocate for yourself, make sure you would factor that in some way, shape, or form, whether that is vacation days, or as Darwin did on some of his snow days, be able to work from home. Any ways you can do it to give yourself, take a little bit of the constant pressure that you're under all the time. People have, they don't understand it, but if you can have those conversations with board members and kind of protect yourself in that way to help you be more successful to serve the district better, it's no cost to the district in a lot of those situations. Like there's a whole avenue of options there to dig into to really help take care of yourself and then to ultimately serve your district. Initial contract, I mentioned earlier, you'll never have more leverage. It's a perfect place to start. Plus, you're setting the baseline for all of your future contracts. That excitement of a new job, that excitement of a new location is great, but it's also a perfect time to slow things down, reflect on what they're offering, reflect on what you really want. And it's also a perfect time if you haven't looked at an attorney for advice. It doesn't hurt to get that initial contract looked at either, to make sure you're really getting what you want and really putting yourself in a healthy position. Darwin mentioned the moving costs. I would definitely look at that. You're picking up your family, you're moving to a whole new place. There is no reason that shouldn't be part of your standard initial contract as well. Now they have some things they can look at as whether they will only offer that moving expenses if you move into the district, but there's some pieces there you can negotiate to make that a win-win as well. Where I really want to spend some time on is once you get past that initial stage, I think for me became really important for success in contract negotiations. It was just tied directly to my evaluation. And I really try to make that evaluation not be an end of the year conversation only, because then all of a sudden you're going through your evaluation with the board, you're trying to decide contracts, dollar amounts. It just becomes a rushed, not a very thoughtful system process to look at. So we switched to the last several years, has made it an ongoing conversation. Every month I would give the board an update on my goals, where I was at, just informally through my Friday communications with them. And every quarter we would set aside a work session time after a board meeting and just have a conversation about my goals, where I'm at with everything, and just have that conversation, give them an update and really address my priorities, and just tie that into the conversation as well with the contract. Because in my mind, you should be rewarded for your quality work, and there's no better way to have that happen than during your contract time. So I try to make those two things mesh together as much as possible. Doing all of that, like Darwin said, a lot of times we tried to get to agreement on the basics of my contract for the next year about that December, January timeframe, just to make sure we're all thinking we're in the right spot. And if not, if we need to consider other options, then both of us would have that time period to do that too. So now we didn't always finalize those contract details until all the other groups were settled, to make sure we were in alignment there as well, so it wasn't out of place one way or the other. But most of that work, that groundwork, was done before we got to that April, May, June time period, and that was a big change that really helped that process become just more of a healthy conversation and not an end of the year checklist item that's stressful or doesn't get the attention it needs. The last piece I really want to hit is everybody in education says they're relationship focused. When you go through interviews, when you meet people and they talk, everybody's about relationships, as we should be. We are literally in the perfect people profession. But I am a firm believer that if you are relationship focused, that means every part of your job, you're relationship focused. So if that's negotiations with teachers, if that's in staff member disciplinary action, if that's in board member conversations about my contract, I really try to keep those relationship pieces as part of that ongoing conversation. It keeps the conversation healthier, I think. It doesn't make as personal of a conversation then. And you really want to make it a win-win. I think Trent was calling it the find the win space. And I completely agree with that as well. When we finished our negotiations or my contract conversations, I always wanted the board to walk out there feeling like they're getting a good deal. They're getting what they want. And I want to walk out there feeling the same way. So you have all your data, you share all your data throughout the year, you share your comparative numbers that Darwin mentioned across the state, because that's important to have. And you want to walk out there, everybody's feeling like it's the right win-win partnership piece of it. I think you only do that if you have that conversation ongoing and you have it really focused on relationships with your board, with your administration, with your staff, all the way through. The last one I just put on there, I mentioned a little bit earlier, is attorney review. I don't think it's needed very often, but I do think some superintendents are hesitant to take things to an attorney to review when things start to get a little tricky, or the initial contract. And I think that's you have to know when to get help, have to reach out to people that know that world way more than I did, at least. I think most administrators probably need that assistance. So don't be hesitant to reach out if you have a clarifying question, or if things are starting to become uncomfortable, or initial contract conversations. I think that initial contact with an attorney can be very beneficial as well. So other than that, I think it's an interesting process to go through. I think it can be a healthy process for everybody as well, even though it's hard to advocate for yourself sometimes to tie in, but if you do it with your goals, it seems to go a little bit easier, I think.
Janet, thank you. I appreciate that. And I really valued that. Number one, you talked about it being ongoing, just that conversation that does add to a relationship, by the way, as well. And, as I mentioned, the winnable space you hit on as well, know what you want and get clear on that. Sometimes that might even be what your spouse wants or wants you to advocate for. And then maybe some of that winnable space of what the board will consider, so that they feel good about the value as well. In this market, guys, we stay busy enough, but I'm just going to tell you, if you're doing a good job and the board believes that, it's in their best interest and your best interest not to have to go through a superintendent search. And so it's just a matter of finding those leverage points to make it work, to keep you in the district. The third.
Trent, I just thought of
Go ahead.
You mind if I had one other thing I thought of when Darwin was talking, actually. When Darwin talked about his negotiations committee, I did something a little bit similar to that, but strictly just for superintendent contract conversations. We ended up getting added into our board policy, and my contract is we would have the board president, the board vice president, and one other board member that was agreed upon between the board president and myself would serve as a 3-person contract committee. And I would meet with them during that quarterly conversations at the end of the year as well, just to have that smaller group discussion about the contract overall. They were usually very short, informal meetings, but it was a good way to keep it a focused group, specifically talking about that. And it kept it fresh in their mind as well, because what you do in September tends to get forgotten by May. So having that 3-person team really worked well together. So I kind of want to copy off of what Darwin said, that benefited us as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Shannon. Appreciate the insights very much. And I know negotiating and sometimes working with boards isn't always easy. So appreciate the experiences there. Kind of tooling down a little bit, Darren Derflinger, longtime superintendent at Van Meter. He's going to offer some really timely things because he's went through this conversation and re-advocated for his contract. You're going to hear some uniqueness in here at kind of the last minute here. Or recently, he was not able to be here live today. So he put together a little recording that I want to share with you before we get into a discussion here, the rest of our webinar. But you'll hear from Darren Derflinger from Van Meter on some strategies and a couple good stories that I think will add to our conversation about trends and advocating for your contract here.
Good afternoon. Everybody had a good week. I might be there today, but Trent asked me to share a little bit about kind of working out, negotiating a contract as a superintendent. This is my second take on the video. My first one seemed a little long, so I'm going to try to shorten this one up a bit. First of all, I think we all know when you first get hired as a superintendent, that's probably one of the best times to negotiate. But my focus is going to be more on after you've been in the district for a while. I kind of felt like there have been 3 iterations of my contract changing. One was when I first got hired. I was superintendent and secondary principal, so that was a little bit of a unique situation. So I saw a pay bump, but maybe it wasn't as significant as it could have been because I probably just didn't know any better. And then when I just became superintendent, I was able to work out keeping my pay the same, even though I was only doing part of the job. Was no longer doing secondary principal, so that was a little bit of a unique situation, but really my focus is going to be, okay, so you've been in the role for a while, you see kind of where you're at, and you have some things maybe you'd like to see done a little differently. What does that look like? So for me, what I try to think about is, there's kind of 4 parts to it, I guess, if you will. First thing is that you got to do your comparisons. You got to, how does your contract, your pay, or benefits, how do they compare to districts similar size or neighboring districts? Once you have that information, I think then you need to start having conversations either with your spouse or just yourself or whomever to kind of think about really what matters to you. I think you can look at comparisons, you can look at salary, you can look at some of the deferred compensation, TSAs, vacation, all of those things, but really you got to decide what matters to you. So, is it times? Well, then you're probably going to focus on vacation and leaves. Is it more retirement? So maybe you're going to look more at deferred compensation. You're going to think more about TSAs. You're going to think about insurance. You're going to think about some sort of payoff to kind of a longevity sort of clause. Is it insurance? Maybe you don't have insurance now, so or family insurance. Maybe that's something. So you got to kind of identify what those things are. I think that's a really important step. And then third is kind of figuring out what process you want to use to go about it. So for me, I had a really good relationship with my board president. So a couple of years ago, we started having conversations, and I started to identify to her like, hey, here's some things that I think would be beneficial and would really help the district kind of ensure that I'm a better chance of me sticking around. I'm just, she knew my youngest was graduating, so it was kind of at that point in my career where maybe I start looking at other positions a little more seriously. I've been approached in the past. She was very aware of that about other jobs, so she knew that maybe we needed to be having this conversation about looking at my contract. So I just I gave her the numbers. Here's some comparisons. Here's some other contracts that I'd seen from other superintendents and things that they'd had. And here's what's important to me. If you could include these in my contract, I think there's a better chance of me more than likely finishing my career here. And so she took that and kind of became my cheerleader, if you will, and started talking about that with some of the other board members about, hey, we need to maybe look at Darren's contract and there's some things that I think we can consider. So that was really kind of over I would say almost a 2-year process. And then I think you just the kind of the fourth key, once you've kind of got that established, is just you got to strike while the iron's hot. The timing is really important. So for us, we'd had a lot of success with growth, and we'd done some things to pay our teachers really well. So I think that was really important. We'd invest a lot of money in our staff, and maybe not quite as much in our administration. Not that we hadn't been paid well, but maybe not at the same level. And we were getting a lot of good positive feedback from our teachers. We'd seen some enrollment growth, which most of you are probably familiar with our district. We'd had some success with activities. And right or wrong, a lot of times people think if you're doing well with your activities and athletics that your school is doing well. But I think what really helped us is when we were identified as a blue ribbon school, it kind of solidified some things that we'd already known. And our high school was identified as the highest performing school in the state. We were 3rd ranked in the U.S. News and World Report. I mean, there's just a lot of good kind of momentum things going. So that's when I reached out a little more formally to my board president and said, hey, I think, the timing would be good for us to reconsider some things in my contract, and here's what I'd like you to consider. And she said, well, write it up. So I did that. And she agreed with most of them. We had a little bit of kind of, just her and I, for lack of a better term, negotiation on things that maybe we could both agree on, or maybe that she think would be a little bit of a harder sell. But for the most part, she agreed with all those things. And then she did kind of for lack of a better term, negotiating with the other board members. And that process worked really well for me. She was able to get everything in my contract and maybe even a little more than what I thought. My contract is very fair right now. It's set up in a way to where it's like a lot of superintendents have. It's a rolling 3-year, but it automatically renews in November. So if I get a kind of a tougher school board, that I will be guaranteed that 3-year prior to them getting on board. I was able to get a TSA. I was able to get a little more vacation. I was able to get an insurance payout for when I retire. And I was able to get some, not increase in sick leave, but some payout for sick leave when I retire as well. So kind of that deferred compensation, because, I know I'm not going to take as much in pay now as maybe I could in a larger school district if I would decide to do something else. But I was able to kind of position myself financially in the future for when I retire by staying here. There's some kind of timing component into it where I basically need to be IVERS eligible, which for me is in about 3 years. So that's the process that worked really well for me. So again, do your comparisons, have your information, figure out what matters most to you. And I think that's what you'd want to focus on, and then kind of get your cheerleader. For me, it was my board president, which I would assume is probably what it would be for most of your districts or most of your roles. And then you just got to find the right timing, and that's going to be a little bit different in whatever situation you're in. So hopefully that was beneficial for you. Trent has my contact information, and many of you might as well. So feel free to reach out, shoot me an email, shoot me a text, and I'd be glad to talk to you a little bit more. I hope everybody has a good week, or a good weekend now, I guess. And go Dogs.
Okay, some good insights from him. One thing I took away from Darren's talk there is the timing. He said, strike when the iron's hot. But the point of that is you're sensitive enough to know that when things are really going well in the district and financially kosher, that's probably the right time versus maybe, stagnant growth or, just a tough funding time. That's not the right time. So I took that away from his thoughts there as well. The other thing I don't want to close this without mentioning is the role, we haven't talked about this much, I'm bringing it up, but your business manager or CFO is certainly part of this, because your board president is probably asking them how the dollars and cents are going to work out, not just for you, but in the negotiations process of the rest of the administrators. So making sure you have the information and hopefully that they're an advocate and at least provide factual information is not necessarily part of the negotiating for you, but also making sure that the numbers are accurate, that the board is getting on your behalf. So wanted to mention that today. With that being said, we're running up against about just a few minutes left here, and the hour that we build out for these Friday Focus. I hope the insights are very practical from different perspectives. I think we hit a nerve today based on the number of people on board of a topic that's timely. And so I would tell you, if you have hot topics like this that you think are valuable, that we can put some insights together and find some great folks that can offer strategies or information on, please let us take the lead and organize that for you in a Friday Focus like this. Our fall one was on AI in the hiring process. That was also, I think, very, very insightful. So we hear from you in setting these up. We don't have a pre-canned or packaged agenda or itinerary for these. So please stay in touch. I'm going to close it with this today, and then we will shut our recording off for our YouTube channel, and we'll have invite anybody to stay on if they have questions, want to offer other insights, or have a discussion. You're welcome to stay on for another 10, 15 minutes. We'll talk about that. But here's what I want to leave you with today on our topic around trends and negotiations. And that's this. If you continue to do the good work that you are doing, working hard on behalf of the district, you put yourself in a great spot to advocate and winnable space for the board to want to keep you and give you what is reasonable. So please just keep doing the good work for your district and kids, and know hopefully that reasonable people will take care of you in contract negotiations. The other thing I just wanted to close with is knowing what you want as well as what's going to make your family potentially content there. But also, and this may seem weird for a search consultant to say this, but if you get what you want, as Darren mentioned in the video, you also can't be out there looking for the next job real quick. Or that's going to backfire next time when you try to advocate for your own contract. So if they're giving you what you want, you have to smile. The grass isn't greener on the other side. The work is the work in a lot of places. But that also means that when I call, you might not be able to look at that next job opportunity. So please know that's the honest truth. And then third, I want you to know that we're here at Grundmeyer Leader Services. Our mission is to transform education, and that's supporting you. That's making sure you have the information you need. That is taking a phone call, just being objective and listen and giving you general feedback or guidance that we can to support you in the district. So if that's contract language, if that's market trends, we have a new package where we come out and actually facilitate the evaluation process so you don't have to do that for yourself. We are here to help. And I mean that sincerely and honestly today as well. Thank you for attending our Friday Focus and hope it was a meaningful 45 minutes of your time. Please stay in touch and please stay on if you want to extend the conversation.